The police don't just exist. They're not a fact of nature. The police are brought into existence to serve a function, and a lot of effort and resources are put into keeping them in existence. Why? What are police for? It's often said that the police are there to keep us safe. But you only have to look around at all the people they harm and all the people who are left in danger by our society to see that safety isn't their primary concern. The police exist to preserve order. This isn't a controversial answer. It's something politicians and police themselves would say. Let's take them at their word. What does this mean?
When we talk about order, we are talking about how a society is organised and how it functions. Our normal day-to-day life has to be maintained. For things to tick along smoothly, people have to act in certain ways. The police play a vital role in making sure this happens. This social order, how society is organised, depends on public order, which just means that when we're out and about in the world, we behave as we're supposed to. We obey norms and conventions. We don't disrupt business or trouble each other and don't interfere with the ordinary operations of society. This is why police like to disperse crowds, whether protests or picket lines or wild parties, even when no crime is being committed. Anything which is a threat to public order and to the wider social order becomes their business. Whether it's a good thing that police maintain order depends on how much of a fan you are of the status quo.
Where do the threats to this social order come from? Disorder doesn't come from outside our society. It comes from within. This society produces massive wealth and then excludes most of the population from access to it. What you own is yours, and what you don't is off limits. This pits individuals against each other. Everyone must look out for themselves and pursue their own self-interest, and these competing interests come into conflict. This way of living encourages us to view each other as obstacles and resources, an attitude which fosters abusive behaviour, and people take the opportunity to get ahead at the expense of others. People who don't own much are forced to compete with one another for the chance to be exploited in the production of profits for an employer. For some, this poverty leads to desperation and it breeds theft and violence between people. This society produces antisocial behaviour. When people say that the function of the police is to preserve order, this is what is meant. Instead of changing the conditions which produce hostility and conflict, the police are deployed to keep the consequences in check. Social order sounds positive to a lot of people. It implies a harmonious coexistence. But what kind of harmony requires violent enforcement?
This commitment to order is where a lot of police bias and discrimination comes in. People who don't seem to fit within the social order are in danger of becoming their targets. For example, this means that neurodiverse or disabled people who behave in ways which are perceived as being erratic, unpredictable or unusual frequently have the police called on them and encounter police violence. But it's not only unusual behaviour which marks people out from the normal social order. Some people are seen as inherently disorderly because of who they are. This helps explain some aspects of police racism. In the early days of colonisation, indigenous people were described as uncivilized and in need of having order imposed on them. This disorderliness was often how extricative and exploitative colonial domination was justified. Disorderly people could not be trusted with the management of land, resources, or even their own lives. Throughout history, anti-colonial resistance movements have been a threat to Western social order. A modern white supremacist ideology remains obsessed with the idea that people of colour are dangerous, emotionally volatile, and less capable of responsible participation in stable society. In a similar way, the traditional social order has the heteronormative family at its heart. Queers and gender non-conforming people are therefore excluded from it. even as some homosexuals are experiencing a greater degree of incorporation into the social order through the extension of institutions like marriage and the normalization of same-sex relationships, those whose gender presentation or sexual behavior seem to disrupt or threaten normative social values still find themselves at risk of persecution. It is the police who decide what counts as disorder and what doesn't.
Maintaining social order also means that problems don't get addressed if those problems would require radical change. The police's notorious failures to respond to reports of domestic violence are a result of their desire to maintain order. What happens behind closed doors is of less concern to them. Finally, it's clear that holding the police themselves accountable for the harms that they have caused might also risk undermining stability and order. Police officers seldom face criminal charges or internal disciplinary sanctions for their most violent behaviour. That is, unless public opinion turns against them and there is a threat of greater disorder. Many of us have witnessed unacceptable behaviour by police officers, whether it's using excessive violence, violating people's rights, targeting people of colour, or making bigoted comments. All of us have seen the same and worse reported in the media. It might not be every officer that does this, but the ones that do can only do so with the power of the institution behind them. Instead of focusing on the actions of this or that officer, or trying to work out which cops are nice or nasty people, we started with a much simpler question. What are police for? Here we're not only concerned with the extremes of bad behaviour when policing goes wrong, we're also trying to explain the day-to-day reality of policing going right.
When we asked about the function of the police, we see that some things simply can't be reformed, and that the police themselves exist to help hold back or avoid reforms in other areas. The police are presented as a solution to social problems, but by maintaining order, they uphold the conditions which produce those problems. Their continual failure to solve these problems is used as a justification for maintaining and expanding their existence.